What is up, everybody? It's your boy, Pigskin Pete. It's that time again. It's time for the weekly top 10 college football rankings. The big dog Clemson goes down in South Bend. Let's talk about it. Let's go. All right, guys, if you're new here, consider hitting the thumbs up and the subscribe button. I do these college football videos and live streams year-round. There is no off-season for Pigskin Pete. Some major changes. Seems like every week so far here in the top 10 rankings. We knew we were going to have a major shift, or at least some movement in the top 5 because we had number 1, and it's the AP number 1, playing the AP number 4, Notre Dame. So one of those two had to lose. That team ended up being Clemson. But let's start with number 10. Number 10 has been a difficult ranking to do all season, and it's not getting any easier. At this point, you start having teams like Coastal Carolina and BYU. You have to start to acknowledge the fact that they're still undefeated this late in the season, despite who they've played. I'm still not going to have either one of those teams in my top 10. Now, you can make an argument, right? They're just outside of my top 10. Let's say maybe somewhere between 10 and 15. You can put both of those teams at this point, but I still think there's 10 teams better than those two teams, despite the record. And that's the way I do things here. It's a mixture of it's a mixture of everything. Okay, basically, it's really just my opinion, but it comes down to who have you played, who have you lost to, how have you beat the teams that you did beat, all of that sort of thing. So. Team number 10 this week is going to stay the same as what it was last week. Oklahoma State did not play this past weekend. The last game that they did play, they lost against Texas. They're still the only one-loss team in the Big 12, and I think they're a pretty good squad. So, in other words, if you're asking me why I don't have BYU or Coastal Carolina in that 10 spot, it's because I think Oklahoma State would beat the brakes off of both of those teams. That's why, and I think that they would be favored in Vegas as well before the game started. Let's move on to number 9. Indiana making their first appearance in my top 10. I thought maybe they were a little bit of a fraud. They are now 3-0 in the Big Ten. The argument can be made, look at the teams that they've beat. They're no good. Whatever. Look, they're 3-0 and they look very good. I don't know what else to tell you other than that. And the deeper that the Big Ten and the Pac-12 get into their seasons and remain undefeated, their teams are going to be ahead of a one-loss team or a two-loss team from another conference. It's just the way it goes. Winning has to matter no matter who you're playing. They're playing in a Power 5 conference and they're winning. Now, they lose this weekend. Maybe they fall out of the top 10. But as of right now, Indiana's playing good football and looks like a decent squad. So I have them. They've earned their way into the top 10, and I have them at number 9. Team number 8, Miami. Which Miami's going to show up week to week? We don't know. They only have one loss on the season, and that loss is to Clemson. So is that one of the best losses in the country? If there's such a thing, I think that it is. If you take all of these one-loss teams and stack them up in the Power 5 and you try to sort out who's better than the other one, if they haven't played against each other, there's really no way to determine that. But I think you have to give credit to Miami. This past weekend, they played an NC State team most people think Miami's a better team than NC State. I don't think that's a debatable. But normally, in years past, when Miami gets into a game where they're trailing or struggling against an inferior opponent talent-wise, they usually fold like a lawn chair and lose that game. Now they're winning those games, or at least this season, when they're getting into these close games against teams that they're better than, they're still coming out with a victory. Something has to be said for that. Miami still has at least one really tough game on their schedule, and that's North Carolina at the end of the season. But for right now, Miami's holding strong in the top 10 at number 8. Who did they play this weekend? I forget. Virginia Tech. Now, If they lose to Virginia Tech, they're out of the top 10. We'll see what happens. Miami at 8. Let's look at number 7. Cincinnati's holding firm. They've been at 6 or 7 in my rankings for the past month. I keep waiting for them to show a weakness, fall off, maybe not beat their opponent by 3 or 4 touchdowns. Every week they exceed expectations. How do you not have Cincinnati in your top 10? I mean, I guess the only argument against it for a lot of people is that they haven't played nobody, that whole thing. Of course, nobody plays anybody according to the trolls. We all know that. But it's not about who they're playing. It's about how they're beating them. And they played some pretty good group of 5 teams, too. It's not like they're playing, whatever. Nobody state, right? They're playing the top tier teams in the AAC, and they're dominating them. They dominated SMU, Memphis. I mean, what do you want them to do? They're playing great football. And I think they would have a legitimate chance against some of these other Power 5 teams if you put them on a neutral field. Maybe not win it, but they would have a chance. Cincinnati playing good football. I have them at number 7. Some people have them as high as 5. Number 6, Florida. I mean, you got to reward Florida for what they did to Georgia. Now, Georgia's a mess. There's really no way. There's no white and nice way to put it. All right, they have a great running game. Georgia, nothing new. They always do. Solid defense that gave up over 40 points to Florida on Saturday. They can't move the ball through the air at all. And when I say at all, I mean at all. Both of the quarterbacks that played significant amount of time in this game on Saturday were below 50% completion percentage, multiple turnovers. It's really mind-boggling what's going on in Georgia. But nonetheless, you have to reward Florida. The question was, can Georgia's defense, since they're so good, can they limit Florida's scoring? And I said if this game gets into the high 30s or 40s, Florida's going to win the game. There's no way in hell. And I think I pretty much nailed it. I said there's no way in hell that Georgia's going to score more than 28. I think that's exactly what they scored. Was 28. Yeah, 44-28. So you got to reward Florida. Do they have the best offense in the country? When both Kyle Trask and Kyle Pitts are both healthy? I mean, I know Pitts got banged up or something in this game. Hopefully he's okay. Do they have the best offense in the country? Does Ohio State have the best offense in the country? Alabama, maybe? I don't know. But they're in the conversation. Florida looks really good. Defense, not so much. But other than that, they're going to be a hard team for anybody to beat. Speaking of beating Florida, A&M. One of the biggest stories in the SEC this year, especially since they struggled against Vanderbilt, who's the worst team in the SEC, week 1. Then but they found a way to beat Vanderbilt. Then they went and got handled pretty convincingly on the road in Tuscaloosa by Alabama. So everyone saw this is the same old Texas A&M team, the same team that everybody has high expectations for every year and comes out and loses 5 games. Meanwhile, A&M has just kept their head down, has a decisive win over a top 5 team at the time, Florida, and is winning every other game. They're sitting there with 1 loss, their only loss being to Alabama. They are definitely worthy of the top 5. And I don't see a game, unless they just lose a fluke game, I'm not sure that they don't win out and have a chance at number 4. I think they have a legitimate gripe, even if they don't win the SEC West. If they're a 1-loss team at the end of the year, they have a legitimate chance of making the playoffs. We'll talk a little bit more about that scenario in a minute, because what happened in South Bend this past weekend affects that considerably. Number 4, Clemson. Thought about putting Clemson at number 5 because they have very similar situations. They both have 1 loss. I'm comparing A&M and Clemson at this point. They both have 1 loss. They both have 1 loss to a really good, top 5 team. They both have beaten a top 10 team. In Clemson's case, that was Miami, and in A&M's case, that was Florida. So a lot of similarities between these two. The only difference I'd say is if you look at their losses, Clemson's loss was a lot closer on the road. I mean, obviously double overtime. and A&M's was a decisive loss. They got pretty much blown out in Tuscaloosa. That's the only reason I eke out Clemson at number 4. Now, none of this matters. Not for Clemson, it doesn't matter. For A&M, it does matter because they're trying to most likely backdoor their way into the playoff. Clemson, it controls their own destiny at this point. If they win out, let's say they make it to the ACC championship with no more losses, and then they beat Notre Dame in the ACC championship, 11-1, ACC champion Clemson is in the playoffs. Same thing for Notre Dame. Let's go ahead and look at 3-2-1, and I'll explain how this affects A&M and some other teams for the playoff picture. Ohio State 3, Notre Dame 2, Alabama 1. Of course, a lot of the Irish fans are saying how if you're sitting at number 4 and you beat number 1, you should move up to number 1. Doesn't matter. Again, the Irish controls their own destiny at this point. Actually, I take that back. This is what I was talking about as it relates to that 4th playoff spot. If you're A&M on the outside looking in, thinking you can backdoor your way in there, let's say the Irish meets up with Clemson in Charlotte on December 19th for the championship game. Clemson wins by 7 instead of the Irish winning by 7. Then you have an 11-1 ACC Clemson champ. They're in. Then you have an 11-1 Irish team who doesn't have the ACC championship, but they're still only a one-loss team in the ACC, and they have a win over Clemson in their back pocket. Do they get considered for the 4th spot even as a non-ACC champ? This is something that really hasn't been considered until now. And I think that their answer is yes, they would be considered for it. The same reason that A&M would be considered for it for not even winning their division is the same reason the Irish, even if they lose the ACC championship, could be considered for that 4th spot. A lot of interesting things can happen. Buckeyes at number 3. They look great. Still a small sample size, but they look great. I'm not putting them ahead of Notre Dame at this point because they don't have a win on their schedule so far. It's not their fault, but they don't have a win on their schedule near as good as Notre Dame's. I mean, nobody does. Clemson was ranked number 1 going into the game, so nobody has a better win than beating the number 1 team. And then, of course, Alabama at number 1 looks like the most complete team to me. If Alabama lined up against any of these teams in the top 10, they would be favored on a neutral field. The closest one to them as far as the point spread would probably be, the public perception would maybe be Ohio State. But Alabama looks like the best team until further notice. And at this point, honestly, I believe Alabama's going undefeated in the regular season. I think they're going to win the SEC championship, and they head into the playoffs as the number 1 seed, undefeated. That's my prediction. They have it all. The biggest question mark coming into the season for Alabama was how will Mac Jones live up to what Tua did for the past few years, and he's playing amazing. So there's very few weaknesses on this Alabama team. Very, very few. They are good. So roll Tide, all you Alabama fans out there. All right, everybody. Please leave a comment. Again, hit the thumbs up and the subscribe button if you're new here. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you think about my top 10. Let me know where I was right. Let me know where I was wrong. I'll see you guys very soon. Thanks for stopping in. Pigskin Pete is checking out.